Hi everyone, it's Jaden for Student Pages. I hope I've caught you all doing very well today. Today we are here with the MP Jerome Mayhew to talk a bit more about financial literacy for young people. How are we doing, Jerome?
I'm doing really well. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. It's excellent to have you on today because you are the chair for the All-Parliamentary Group on Financial Education for Young People. So what better person to have on to talk about the subject?
You're really kind. It's the second largest all-party parliamentary group in Parliament. I'm ashamed to say that the largest is the one in favour of beer, but I suppose as students you might be able to get on board with that one as well. But
I can kind of get that.
after beer, we are the largest all-party group, and there's no real party politics in this. I'm a Conservative, but a lot of the members are Labour, Lib Dem, all sorts. The vice chair is Lord Blunkett, David Blunkett, who you may remember, and Tony Blair's government was a cabinet minister. So all of us are brought together by a desire to improve personal finance training for young people, because if you're like me, you won't have got any education about all those kind of things, which as you become a grown up are really important. And too often we cock it up and make big mistakes that have huge implications for us right throughout our lives because we didn't know any better.
No, absolutely. It's such an important thing to tackle. And, in the education system as it stands, it's just not there. We don't have that. So, I mean, for you, then, what was the key motivator in taking an active interest in youth financial literacy? And what was sort of the kickoff point for yourself to join this concept?
Well, I became a politician in 2019. Before that, I ran a business, and I'm a parent. I've got three children who are now between 16 and 21 years old. And I look back at my own education, and I wasn't taught a thing about personal finance. What I learned was from my parents. And I started visiting schools as when you're a newly elected MP. It's a great access, which as a member of the general public you don't get. And it just became really apparent to me that the education on personal finance that they had whenever it was 40 years ago hasn't really improved for a lot of schools anyway between then and now. And then I looked at my own children; they weren't getting any education either. So I was really concerned that sensible financial education, things like debt management, things like whether you go for a pension, what is an ISA, what is compound interest, what kind of mortgages are there out there, and what's the difference between interest only and a capital repayment one, and what impact will that have on you, and also a defined contribution or a defined benefit pension scheme. Those are just words, aren't they? But they are really, really important words. And I just realized that things hadn't really got better, and it was a middle class secret. The people who really, really need this, everyone needs it, but people who really need it are people perhaps who come from a financially chaotic family, but they're not learning it at home. So it's
Yeah.
even more important that they learn about on the one side of the scale on debt management and budgeting, and to the other side on what to do with savings. Are savings a good idea, or do you want to piss it all away by the end of the month? What do you want to do? And you have choice as a grown up, but choices have consequences, and you need to understand what they are.
Yes, absolutely. And again, it's the earlier you start, isn't it? That this stuff helps as you get older. And again, I imagine, well, I don't have to imagine, again, from my own perspective, being, I'm freshly done with university, but it wasn't that long ago that I was in secondary school. And, there was absolutely no talk of any of what you just mentioned. The only reason I actually understand what you just spoken about is because of the other people involved in financial literacy that I've spoken to doing these interviews. I didn't know anything myself, and it's terrifying, really, isn't it, when you
Okay,
realize these are such
so
key things.
yeah, look at you. I mean, how old are you now? You've got 23,
I'm
24,
21.
21. If you start, the difference between starting a pension age 21 when you're on the national minimum wage and you're getting the minimum employer contribution. So this isn't a fancy pension. This is just, basic pension. The difference between starting at age 21 and 26 or 7, when people, eventually get around to thinking about it, would make a difference of about £135,000 to the size of your pension. It's about a 36% difference. And the reason is
It's
because
wild.
yeah, those small contributions from age, I'm approximating the figures here, but from sort of 21, a 5-year period right at the start of your career, because the payday is when you're 67 or, let's face it, by the time you get to retire, maybe 70, I don't know. It's been working for you all those years. It is the most effective saving you can do. So you could be well over £100,000 richer in retirement, about 36% more in your pension, just by doing the minimum contributions from your age for the next 5 years. It's worth doing,
Yeah,
isn't it?
it's absolutely mind blowing. Yeah, no, I'm 100% on board with you. Absolutely. I mean, go on then. I'm curious. So, what are some of the key challenges in investing in a curriculum in the current education system that's geared toward teaching children and young people about this stuff? Because I imagine it's quite difficult a lot of the time to, make convincing arguments because it's been barren, in the education system for so long.
Well, so there's a whole raft of things. So, in no particular order, in secondary school education in England, we've had personal finance, financial education as part of the curriculum since 2012, from memory. But two-thirds of the teachers who are supposed to be teaching us this stuff didn't even know it was part of the curriculum 18 months ago. So, as policymakers, we think, jolly good, well done us. We've got it, we won the campaign. But actually, the only thing that matters is it being taught on the ground. And it fits in PSHE. PSHE isn't inspected primarily by Ofsted when they come around the schools. It's in too many schools, it's a sort of add-on bit of teaching as opposed to having a departmental head and it being a core part of the curriculum. It shouldn't be like that, but that is often how it is treated. You've got teachers who are rubbish at their own personal finance because they didn't get any training, so they feel underconfident in the subject. So it's one to skip. There's every single financial organization you can think of with its ESG program thinks, oh yeah, financial education, financial literacy, this is brilliant. Well, there are thousands of different resources out there, but no one knows which ones to trust and which ones not to trust. There's a bit of, some teachers don't like having commercial organizations within the school environment and others don't mind it. So there's a bit of inequality there. So we need a common version of the truth. I've got the Oak Academy. Do you remember the Oak Academy in COVID times? They're the ones who created all those
Yes, yeah.
online lessons. They're now an arm's length body of the Department of Education. I've got them to produce, which they've already done, 45 different personal finance, financial education lesson plans. So we've got,
Oh, that's excellent.
yeah. So we're making progress. So that's really good. The big banks and other financial organizations are really keen to put together a kind of white cover training document so that we're not competing and it doesn't have their logos splashed all over it. So there's progress there. There's a review of the curriculum which the government's undertaking at the moment, which will report back in October. And we're very keen to raise the importance of financial literacy. The problem that you've always got is that the teachers tell us, and with reason, that the day is really busy. Don't add in something unless you're prepared to take something else out. So it's not cost free, and you've just got to work out how you can, perhaps using the same what we've currently got in the curriculum, which is, for example, we've got a maths GCSE, which the vast majority of people take. I've been working with the 4 examining bodies, saying, well, look, even if you didn't change the curriculum, what can you do with the current curriculum? And Pearson went away, and they've come back saying, well, two of the questions on the GCSE paper could always be examined through the lens of personal finance. So you can see how, okay, it's in PSHE, maybe we can't change that, although I hope we can. But let's look at the maths GCSE. And if every maths teacher knew that 2 of the questions on every GCSE paper was going to be examined through the lens of personal finance, it's going to get taught, isn't it? So it's trying to, as a backbencher, I don't have the levers of power. My party is in opposition at the moment, and but it's working with the system to try and get the outcome you want. That's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a whole kettle of fish, I'm sure, but no, it sounds like real progress has been made already. I mean, I read pretty recently that half of 7 to 17-year-olds currently receiving this education, it's just not happening, which is just mind blowing for such a large portion of people to not be receiving this education.
Yeah, I mean, there's different statistics on this, but it's certainly the case that a high percentage of students don't remember being taught any financial education. It's not quite the same as not actually having been taught it, but don't remember it. And that brings into the question, what importance within the teaching establishment is being given to this? How heavily are you highlighting it? And when are you teaching it? Because people pay attention when something matters and is relevant to them. So, at the one end, the evidence suggests that our basic attitudes towards money are set when we're about 7 years old. I mean, amazing. So you've got to be right in there in the primary school dealing with attitudes towards money. And then at the other end, when do you start worrying about PAYE and tax? It's when you might have a part-time job. So it's towards the graduation end of secondary education, certainly in tertiary education, so at university or FE colleges. And then it's really important. You want to know about tax, you want to know about pensions when it's relevant to you.
No, absolutely. I mean, I suppose to spin off a little bit then, could you provide a bit of insight into the dormant asset scheme? And how does that relate to financial literacy? What are some of the challenges being pushed back from Whitehall releasing those funds?
So, for your listeners and readers, what this is dormant assets are essentially bank accounts which people have forgotten about and died, or there is unclaimed cash floating around in the sort of banking industry, which the government eventually gets its hands on, as called a dormant asset. And the government then works out, rather than it going off to back into the general treasury pot, they've allocated it into four groups, one of which is loosely speaking, financial education. And you've tested me. I think it's about 138 million quid. It's quite a lot of money, although I don't have the figures directly in front of me.
Huge sum.
And it's the government's handed that on to an organisation called Fair for Finance, I think it's called, and it's up to them how they then distribute it. There's a concern at the moment that that's going to be directed to adult education, important though that is. We think that we need to be getting people younger, or we should be doing both, obviously, but that it's important that young people get a chunk of that cash to help fund some of the things I've been talking about earlier. And my latest meeting was with a government minister last week about this to encourage the right approach. And to be fair to them, I think they're listening, but you will find out in a few weeks' time.
I mean, you've actually mentioned something interesting there that I was going to bring up about financial education in like the primary education sectors. I mean, as far as I'm aware, there's a lot of objections being put forward to teaching at such a young age, but I can't personally understand that because I see it as a win-win scenario for society as a whole.
So. I mean, it's been part of the primary curriculum in Scotland and Northern Ireland for years, for about 10 years. So it's not that there aren't resources or that this is a wholly novel approach to education. It just isn't. What we need to do is to get it more centered in the curriculum for England, and then not just get it in the curriculum, but actually see it turn up in the classroom. Because as we discussed 20 minutes ago or 10 minutes ago, that's not always the case. And I think what it is when we're learning about money, there's some really interesting changes in attitudes. Because when I was a child, when I was a boy, you learnt money, counting. You learnt how to count with coins. And so there's a link between physical money and arithmetic, and it was all natural. But for somebody growing up now, who, let's say they're 5 or 6 now, they may hardly have seen a coin or even paper money, because we're all on our phones, aren't we, or with your cards, but Apple Pay or the equivalent. So there's what we're seeing is a breakdown in the correlation between arithmetic and so we're having to work out different ways of how to teach primary schools, primary children about money and its importance. And the idea, there's this great phrase, isn't it? Delayed gratification. So it sounds a bit of a mouthful, but if you think about it, delayed gratification is what saving is. It's saying, look, I've got 10 quid. I can either go and have a nice time right now, or I can delay the bit of fun I'm going to have with that 10 quid. And in 5 years' time, it'll be 15 quid or maybe even 20 quid. That is the very basic concept. And it will look after me when perhaps I really need it, as opposed to out on the razzle. And the basic attitude, it feels almost hardwired into some people and not in others, that being responsible with money, saving it, putting away for a rainy day, investing it so that it grows, so it's working for you rather than you always working to earn a bit of money. I mean, how great would that be if you get to the stage in life where money has been working for you all your life, and then it's paying you rather than you having to scrape and scrimp for the end of the month?
Yeah, fantastic.
Just think of that. And that is in essence what delayed gratification is. If you invest in it could be in any kind of investment or savings with compound interest. So, compound
Yeah.
interest is where the first year you get a quid on your, well, that'd be a quid on your 100 quid. And then the next year you get interest on £101, and the next year you get interest on £103, and then interest on, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's like a hockey stick,
Yep.
just like, remember during COVID, when we used to watch telly and see all those graphs about how the virus spread and the rate of
Yes.
the rate of replication, the R rate, and it was it would go, wouldn't do anything, tiny, 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 and then suddenly it would go like a hockey stick.
Yep.
Okay, that is
Hmm.
compound interest. That is exactly what
Yeah.
compound interest does. Doesn't you feel, oh guys, I haven't used that 100 quid for a year, and all I've got is a couple of quid to show for it. What's the point? But 30 years down the line, bang, because it's suddenly
Yeah.
got big, and that's what we got to with unless you're planning on kicking the bucket at 35, which I hope you're not. We've got to think about the future. And this is what it does.
Yeah.
And
No active plans
no one told me
personally.
this. No one told me this. And I'm 55 and I'm sort of working it out as I go along.
Yeah,
Madness.
and you're wishing you knew.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep. No, absolutely. I mean, something I'm curious about then, has there actually been any consideration given for rewriting the curriculum in its entirety with a focus more on, AI, financial literacy, web development, languages as sort of the core fundamentals, and then mathematics and sciences building around those? Or is that
So
very far
the
off currently?
The government is undertaking a full curriculum review right now, and it reports back in October. I can't
Right.
speak for the government, I speak for the opposition, but they'll be looking at the curriculum more widely. But I'm not sensing that their appetite is for a wholesale relook at what the concept of education is. And I personally wouldn't want them to chuck out the baby with the bathwater, but I just do think it's odd that I know a ton more about Oxbow Lakes and how they're formed than I do about any kind of financial, personal finance. And
Oh, I
although,
relate to that. Oh my
yeah, I can remember
goodness.
Oxbow Lakes,
Yeah.
which I love. I love that I know
Yeah,
about
of
Oxbow
course I
Lakes.
can.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
and it is really interesting. But in the big scheme of things, I'd also like to know about pensions and savings
And
and
again,
budget.
I know it's an obvious and reoccurring argument to make, but again, it is a case of, I remember in school, you're constantly told you will use this stuff in life. And don't get me wrong, I'm not miles away out of secondary school, but there's so much I learned that I simply haven't used. And again, like the geography stuff, if you're going into that career, totally understood. But again, as somebody who never really had any intentions of going into geography, what am I doing with that information that I spent so long learning?
My take on that is I'm a defender of knowledge for its own sake. I think there is something wonderful about having a rounded education and being able to look out the window on a train and understand the environment through which you're traveling. So I am backing geography, physical geography, and there are loads of great things. And one of my children has done a whole load of classical civilization now. On the what does that put food on the table? No, it doesn't. But does that give you the basis on which our Western civilization is founded? And does it give you a greater level of understanding of the society in which we currently live? Yeah, it does. And I think that's brilliant too. But let's not have a false dichotomy here where it's either we learn about Oxbow Lakes or we learn. You can do a bit of both. And I just think we've got the balance a bit wrong and that we're excluding something which is really, really important to everyone and should be really important to politicians. So I'm going to put my proper politician's hat on here because the government doesn't have much money. All right. We've got an aging population, whichever party is in power. We've got an aging population, which is going to be much more expensive, at least for the next 15 years, on social care, on the NHS, and all the stuff that really costs a ton of money. Plus, we need to spend more on defence. So whatever government's in power is going to be short of cash. So why not have something which in government terms is free? Education, we're already paying for the teachers, we're already paying for the buildings, people already go to school. That over a period of 20 or 30 years could have a profound effect on how many people have recourse to the state, to the welfare system, because they haven't made good economic choices throughout their life. They've done stupid things and they're reliant on benefits as a result. even if we made a 5% difference to people's approaches to how they use their own money, how responsible they are with their own finances, that pays the government back by billions in 15, 20 years' time. So, why wouldn't you do it? It's one of the best things
Yeah.
that a Chancellor of the Exchequer could do.
Does seem a no-brainer. Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, it's funny. I was going to ask about the Chancellor. In light of the 2029 OECD program for international student assessment on financial literacy, has there been any positive action toward joining the scheme, or can you tell our student readers more about what that
Yeah.
program
I mean,
specifically is about?
yeah, so this is PISA, the PISA scheme. And we've done really well under the Conservative government. The reforms which we put into education, which weren't very popular at the time, but the result has been we've shot up the international tables for reading and writing, and maths and sciences.
That's excellent.
They weren't adopted because Labour ran Wales. This is me being party political, but it's fair enough. They weren't adopted in Labour run Wales and in the SNP run Scotland, and they've gone backwards. The SNP to such an extent that they've stopped collecting the data, and Wales that they've just gone backwards. Whereas England, we're now the best readers of developed country in Europe. So
Wow.
so there is good stuff there because fundamentally you get what you measure. And the idea about PISA is that you can apply in 2029 to join PISA and financial literacy. And I raised that with the government, had meetings with the civil servants who are the ones who do these kind of long-term plans, and it's pretty positive. I thought that it doesn't cost that much. It's about £300,000 to join up to this scheme. I got banks to say they'd fund it, so it wouldn't cost the government a penny. In an annoying government way, they've said, no, we can't take your money, and we'll all be a bit sort of coy about whether we're going to do it. And you just think, oh,
Of course, they
why?
have.
Why? Someone else, someone comes up to you and says, there's this really good thing, and I'll pay for you. I'd say thank you very much. Who do I send the thank you letter to? But government said no, they have to do it their own way. Which okay, they haven't committed to it, but the noises are modestly positive. But it's one of those again no-brainer things. If you think this is important, let's start measuring it. Just as
Yeah.
if we think it's important, Ofsted should measure the compliance when they go into a school to do an examination, a review, an inspection. Sorry, that's the right word. And just have a look. It's on the curriculum. Have you taught it? Show me the evidence. And you get what you measure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, any progress, of course, of good progress. So I'm glad to hear that there are steps being made to any degree. I think that's excellent. I mean, so looking outside of governmentals, then, what can we do as the next generation, just generally, to help this cause?
Sounds really unfashionable, but email your MP. But if you had a couple of thousand emails to MPs saying, are you aware of the All-Party Group on financial education for young people? We're really keen that this is part of the programme because I missed out because of I don't know whatever, and I think it's really important. It just raises the awareness so that MPs want whatever party they're from, they want to do the right thing, they want to help their constituents. Often, because we're generalists, we're not specialists. We're sent here to deal with a whole plethora of issues. We can't be brilliant at all of them. So you want to know what your constituents actually think. Not some campaign group, not 38 Degrees, which doesn't someone puts in their postcode and somebody else writes a template email. That's not impressive. What is impressive if someone generally writes to you with their own experience. I, for one, sit up and take notice, and I'm sure lots of other MPs will. So just raising the profile, make decision makers realise that this is a real problem, but with an easy-ish solution. That's what we need.
Yeah, of course, because again, they'll listen, won't they? If the voices are there, if the demand is there, that they'll be given realistically no choice. It's like enough people complain about something, eventually they're going to have to listen. I mean, so again, on somewhat related to the topic, how do you actually explain complex financial concepts to individuals who don't have that knowledge? How do you even start to explain this huge, scary world?
Well, look, I'm not an educator. I'm a politician. So the first lesson would be don't take it from me. Take it from someone who's good at the education thing. I think we all we all know our lived experience, don't we? We all know what's important to us at whatever stage in life that we're at. So I think you need to have age appropriate education at each stage. So, if you're at primary school, it's about very basics idea of budgeting, what money is, where it comes from, what you can do with it. But at a just to get a healthy approach to money at the start. As you get a bit older, we start talking about budgeting and the beginning of the concepts of debt and debt management, particularly for people who come from financially chaotic households. I think that's something we haven't focused a huge amount on in this conversation, but it's really, really important. Middle class, employed, working class, well, these are all archaic phrases, but people who've got a family background which has got good role models for money are going to be, they may not be brilliant, but they're likely to be sort of okay. The people who are really not going to be okay, or where all the odds are stacked against them, are from people who come from financially chaotic backgrounds through obviously through no fault of their own. So we really need, particularly in secondary education, to focus on that cohort so that they get given tools in school which they're not given at home. And then, as I said earlier, as you start moving in that kind of grey area from education towards employment, maybe part-time to begin with and then full-time, the problems you have there, they change, don't they? Your challenges. And so the education needs to deal with the practical help that you can get. Starting a pension early, saving, getting interest on your savings. If you've got it, budgeting again, avoiding debt, all the good stuff that you're learning about now.
Yeah, so you'd say that avoiding debt, starting a pension, they're sort of some of the things we can do now to avoid mistakes further down the line. Because I imagine, I don't think there's ever going to be a point of no return for a lot of people, but I think if you're looking to avoid the mistakes as an adult, you believe that's what we should be doing now.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. And there's a kind of a hierarchy of things you should do. So, get rid of debt first, because whatever savings rate you're going to get, you're going to be paying more for debt. So absolutely get rid of debt first. And then look, I'm not a financial advisor, so I'm not going to give advice. But in my mind, there's a huge benefit in a pension because it's tax free. It works for you. There's a downside, which is that you can't get hold of it until you're 55. So I'm highlighting I'm not a financial advisor. So pensions right up there, and then there's other forms of long-term savings, which might be an equity ISA or ISA is brilliant. Because it's a tax-free wrapper. It's not as good as a pension, but it's still really, really good. And then there's loads of other things as well, which I won't know about because I'm not a financial advisor. But it's just getting the basics. The basics would make a huge difference.
So as opposed to almost wrap things up then, are there any tools or resources that you recommend for students to, get their head in the game early on? Is there anything that you know of that might be helpful with this gap that exists in education for the time being?
I would go to the Oak Academy. So just Google it. And all these resources, they're open source. So you don't have to be a teacher. You can just research it. And they've got, I think it's 45 different lessons, and just browse, go and have a look around, see what you think about that. And then there'll be, it's a while since I've looked into that, but it encourages you to look elsewhere as well. So start there. And if it piques your interest, you can develop further.
Excellent stuff. Well, I mean, Jerome, thank you ever so much. Honestly, it's been an incredible chat. I just really do hope to see further, quicker progress from the government sometime soon, to be honest. Because again, as somebody who has that lived experience, not being taught enough and now being in a position where I'm a very young adult starting out, it is a scary world. And the more I've learned, the more I've realized it really shouldn't be and it doesn't need to be. So I think the movement is excellent, and I'm really hopeful that we'll get somewhere.
Brilliant. Well, thanks very much. Thanks for the interview.
Of course, anytime. Have a good rest of your day.